I played some XCOM Chimera Squad, and I'm going to tell you about it. Looks like I picked the default settings. I was tempted though to go for expert difficulty because I was thinking, well, I am an XCOM veteran, but it does say for XCOM veterans looking for a challenge, and I thought, well, I'm actually not looking for a challenge really, I just wanted to see what's going on. So I scurry back to normal. We're doing the pure default settings for the campaign, so there you have it, if you know what those settings even do. We are Chimera Squad. We're kind of like a SWAT team with the stated goal that we're supposed to be recovering all of the lost weapons that are all over the place after the war in XCOM 2. So this is a continuation of XCOM's vague plot. The thing is, the alien soldiers and the hybrid human-alien soldiers that were made in the previous games are still kind of around. I thought they all died in the previous game, but maybe not. They're still here. So now they just kind of live on Earth. They've been assimilated into the human government, and we've got some new kinds of racism to enjoy because of that. But before we get to the plot and such, let's take a look at the main gameplay differences seen here in the very first battle. So the premise of the gameplay design is that it essentially cuts out the moving around between encounters. And on the face of it, I thought this was a really good idea because that was the main thing I didn't like about XCOM, where you'd have fights, but between the fights, you'd have to so carefully move around for ages to get into them and try to take them optimally. Well, now the fighting is a lot quicker. It just puts you in fights, encounters as it calls them. You just run into a room, it gives you the chance to shoot on the way in, and then like how the AI automatically goes to cover at the start of a fight, your characters will just find some cover somewhere, and then the fight starts. So you sort of have this pre-battle shootout, and then it's essentially a kind of combat puzzle where you just shoot at each other in a room. Once you've cleared the room, the fight is over, and the game will just progress you towards the next fight and do the moving between them for you, which I thought was really nice. By the way, I'm actually commentating this really soon after just starting the game. Normally I would play most of a game before saying anything about it. This is going to be some very first impressions commentary. So I might go and contradict myself later once I decide that actually I hate it being like this. We'll see. Here's the other big difference. You don't select who to move during your turn. The turn order is predefined. You can see it in the top right there. So this is a big difference, and at first I thought I don't like this at all because I liked the freedom of choosing what order to move your squad in. There is a sort of gameplay design upside to this, in that it adds a tactical layer. You could try to deliberately focus down the enemies who are coming sooner in their turn order, to give yourself more turns before the enemy can act against you, that sort of thing. So there's that to consider. I still prefer, I think at the moment, the freedom to move people in different orders on your side, because that opens up so many different possible strategies. You're more limited now, and you also can't move very far in your turns is another limitation. Aside from that, you just need to think about who can outflank who, and keep in mind your movement order in its predetermined fashion. You can work with it basically sometimes, but it is frustrating when doing things in a different order would have been better, and in the old games you were allowed to do that. That's not this game, but my memory of the old games still frustrates me when old strategies would have worked a little bit more effectively. So now you can see we've got one of the aliens being added to our team. One thing I'll say up front about the aliens is that it's really weird how integrated they are into the squad and society. We have like an alien mayor, and you'll see in a second that there are loads of like alien people presenting the news. It really seems odd to me that the aliens, who were all slave soldiers effectively to the ghosts that were controlling the aliens, well, they all are just sort of human now. They have completely human characteristics. They use our guns, our clothes, they speak in our accents and in our language. That was particularly wounding to me. I would like to see at least an accent for the aliens, or something to represent that this is only a few years, I think, after XCOM 2 happens. There should be some kind of difference, especially when the less human-like aliens are involved as well, like the mutons. They're just guys now. They're just a guy about town doing their thing. They go to the grocery store and all that stuff. Feels like alien society actually should be more segregated, and if you wanted the message to be about trying to integrate them, that would be more of the plot. It's sort of almost happened already, whereas I wanted to see, essentially, a spiritual successor to District 9, where the aliens are extremely hard to understand, they're incomprehensibly different, but maybe they come to be integrated over the course of the plot somehow, and it would be the writer's challenge to find a way to make that happen. Well, I suppose the premise of the game didn't allow it, really. It's more like a Marvel Cinematic Universe presentation of the same concept, where the aliens are kind of wacky and cool, and they say strange things sometimes. As you can see, we are getting killed in the next combat encounter. I think you have to die there because it's just telling you what happens when you die, and what happens is less than when you died in previous XCOM games. I think what's going on is if you lose your HP, you go into the bleeding out mode, and you can't die at that stage, but you can then die if the timer runs out. But that just game overs you. You can't continue the game because everyone's a story character, effectively. So there's no permadeath, no squad mates who'll go down for the glory of the team or what have you. That sort of developing storytelling isn't going to be there because it's more of an explicit story, which I guess I am fine with in principle. I tended to try and keep people alive anyway, so it should be all the same to me. I'm just too good at XCOM, I guess, that's what I'm saying. Here's another change. You can try to melee enemies to death. This doesn't do much damage, but always hits, which is quite nice. And if you do take them alive, because we are supposed to be the police, as you may remember, you get bonus resources later, so it's better to take them alive if you can, but the efforts to take enemies alive can make the game harder, which I quite liked basically, and I'm going to try to take people alive if I can for the added challenge and the added currency. A bit of bants here about Cherub nearly dying. Oh, the only thing injured is his pride. And a couple of ribs, hardy ha ha. Well, the game's written with the sort of bantery, Whedon-esque dialogue that I don't like at all, but I'm willing to accept because I understand that people do like it. It's very Marvel, as I said. Well, we'll see some examples of that, I suppose. Maybe I'll complain about it later. Here's the thing I was complaining about a bit earlier. The aliens are so integrated that they are the newscasters, they're the mayor. I don't really know what's going on. I feel like society should have already been racist enough that this wouldn't have happened, and then the plot would be about that. But we've sort of integrated them quite a lot already, and now we're fighting the residual leftover racism, where the people we were killing, by the way, are people who don't like that XCOM has gone soft on the aliens, that sort of thing. So that's the vague vibe they're going for. I just feel like they had to earn it a bit more in the plot. It's too soon after XCOM 2. And the aliens really were very different to the rest of the humans, and they really did all want to kill us. So something big has changed. I feel like that needed to be shown or something to get to where we are now. Well, whatever. Let's just say my appreciation for the plot was hampered by the fact I didn't understand how this game's premise had happened. We need a game, a prequel to Chimera Squad, to explain why, like, the sectoids, who we've spent hundreds of hours being mercilessly terrorized by with their psychic powers and such, are now just guys in suits and ties going, "I'm walking here," on the street, and have been so integrated into society that they're indistinguishable from humans immediately. How did that happen? Well, anyway, we're here now, and you have to pick your main quest at the start. We're going to investigate one of three groups. I'm going to go for the middle one, some alien weapons smugglers. That sounded the closest to what we're supposed to be doing. By the way, I accidentally cut it out, but basically the plot was that the alien mayor was blown up by a bomb after we saved her in the previous mission. So our vague motivation is to find who made this bomb, where it came from, and that sort of thing. As for the non-mission part of the gameplay, it's similar to XCOM. What do you know? You make weapons and research things back in your base. In this case, I'm making there some tranquilizer rounds because I was quite into this idea of taking people alive to get bonus resources. And you can equip tranquilizer rounds to make your weapons non-lethal, but crucially it does not reduce their damage, which is what I would have expected it to do. So it's just free extra intel at the beginning, although you have to buy those rounds, I suppose, so it's not free. Now check this out.
A short while ago, Grey Phoenix engaged unknown assailants at this location. After the shooting stopped, Grey Phoenix locked down the whole block.
Would you say our arrival is key?
Why did I ever teach you puns?
Because you're very instructive.
Kill me now.
Okay, so I was pretty angry at that. Why was that in the game? That was no good. I suppose I straight up don't get it. What were the puns there exactly? Maybe he said key in response to the word lock being used in a previous sentence. I didn't like it, and I thought maybe it was supposed to be endearing in a sort of unfunny sort of way, but I thought it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. I think it actually needed to be slightly more funny to qualify as unfunny, if that makes any sense. Maybe that sort of thing doesn't matter to you. For me, it acts like a repulsion field. I can't become interested in what's going on or the squad dynamic, because it just doesn't quite work. I'm not picking up what they're putting down. What am I supposed to be? A pickup truck? Actually, no, I should just say truck, so that there's an association between truck and pickup. I'm not mad. Well, anyway, we saw a minute ago something I quite liked about the game, which was activating Overwatch. Your Overwatch now functions in an arc. I quite like the idea of debuffing Overwatch in XCOM because it's too powerful. You can be terrorized into not moving by it, and it's too good of an option. So like in XCOM 1, you would use Overwatch just constantly while moving around so that you were always safe. I like the idea that Overwatch matters less in this game, and the enemy very rarely overwatches against you, and their Overwatch is even weaker than yours. We'll see if something comes up. Here's another thing I like. Sometimes you have multiple options to enter the next fight, and the items you have equipped determine whether or not you can take them. In this case, I'm hesitating to go through the wall, because if I go through the door as well, I'll get that armor bonus it mentions for some reason. I think I went through the wall entirely in the end, and then we get into the fight. Here's something that I don't like, and something I always modded out of the older XCOM games. The way you can't kill the low-level enemies in one hit at the beginning of the game. To me, the number of tactical options and the depth of strategy is tied to how reliably you can perform actions. So if you can't just kill an enemy to change the state of the battlefield, your turn is less important than it would be if you could, essentially, which stacks on top of things like your chance to hit being RNG and the damage you do being RNG based, to mean there's a little bit less strategy to it, because you can't really think if I do this then I'll do this, because that second stage is RNG based, so you're sort of stuck thinking about only your next couple of moves ahead. Well, anyway, in the past I'd always just changed XCOM and played it without that being the case. Here, for the purposes of critique, we're going to not one-hit kill things, although you can see in the footage I actually am. Sometimes you get lucky and get critical hits, and then your early game weapons can kill the early game enemies right away. So we get a good breach there. You might have noted we also lost Cherub, so we're doing this final fight with reduced strength, but Cherub seemed to suck anyway, so it's all fine. I was going out of my way in this fight to try and capture everybody, even going to the lengths of not attacking enemies when I could, so that I could attack them with the right characters to either use the tranquilizer rounds or the melee kills, or the melee captures I should say. So, it worked out in the end, it wasn't too risky, and we captured tons of enemies. But we'll see as we go on, that was probably a bad idea. There's another great crit. We got really lucky in this mission, and also Godmother there does +1 damage because she has a better weapon, so that's useful. We come away from the mission with 20 intel from our 12 captured enemies, and that was the first clue that I was wasting my time, because I thought before I captured like 5, and that also gave me 20 intel. Well, it turns out capturing enemies doesn't do that much. I suppose I'll just rant about it later. For now, I'll mention you can also do these Spec Ops, something from XCOM 2, where you send an agent away to do something. We were given a 5th agent, but I was disappointed to see you can't take 5 characters into battle. Well, you actually can. You can take a robot character as a 5th member, who you then can't use unless somebody else dies or something. I don't like that limitation. That's another thing like the damage limitation. I like to be able to have more actions per turn happen just because I find it more interesting. There's not enough to do with only 4 characters. I want bigger battles that happen faster. So while Chimera Squad achieves the faster by cutting out a lot of the downtime, some of the downtime is still there, and I want the time to kill to be lower effectively. I just want to run and gun through these rooms, blasting all over the place, and make it more of a solid puzzle where it's more cause and effect and less RNG-ish. Here's an example of a bad move to make a capture, moving out of cover and making myself exposed, because I really wanted to get those captures thinking it would be quite important, but we'll soon learn it isn't. I'll rant about that in a moment. For now, here's another thing that kind of led me towards something else I'll rant about basically. In many of these one-room side missions the game gives you between the story missions, there are points when the enemy will just start respawning. So we have doors to the edges of the room and enemies will just come in, and it tells you when they're going to come in, so you can set up overwatching against the door, which is handy. But what I was wondering is, should I be fighting these enemies? Because to end the mission, all you have to do is leave after achieving the objective. In this case, it was to extract a civilian. So here I can actually use this once in a mission ability you get to change someone's position in the timeline, to have a round where all of my people will act before the enemy, so it's safe for us to just walk out and leave the enemy there. This is the second or third respawned wave of enemies. Unfortunately, the game actually crashed when I left. I got mad about that because I thought I'd have to replay the mission, so I activated debug mode, thinking I'll just cheat and get through the mission that way. Turns out I didn't have to do that because it saves just before you leave, and it was fine after that. But turning on debug mode does mean you get this annoying red screen thing whenever there's an error, and there are errors quite a lot as it turns out. Here the error message actually calls someone out by name. So Josh Watson, looks like your animation is causing a red screen error when in debug mode anyway. Seems that if you just can't see the error messages, things seem to go mostly fine, although that said the game did just crash, so there are some serious errors still in there. Sometimes, instead of those little one-room side missions, you do these situations. I was hesitant to do the situation because I didn't know what it was going to be. Turns out this is just some free money, effectively. Sometimes your guys don't really go on a mission, they just go and do something and come back with some resources. And that just advances the days, and you have to wait a certain number of days for the next story mission to come up. So there's just loads of this filler content where you train up and get resources before the next story mission. It was an annoying moment in the next one-room mission, where that snake was hiding in the spot I wanted to stand, so I had to move up next to them to make them leave. Luckily, Godmother has this Alpha Strike ability that lets your first move in a mission not count if you activate it during the breach. Basically, it doesn't matter in the end, just a little quiddity to comment on. There was a case where I'd really like to have seen that attack kill the enemy, because what I've done now is moved up to outflank them. The outflanking shot doesn't kill, even at point blank range, and now they'll just outflank me because outflanking works both ways. The upside to this is that the aliens' weapons are even weaker than yours for some reason, and you start with more health than most enemies, which is unlike most XCOM games. So, it's kind of okay to just go tit for tat shooting each other at a corner over and over again. I just don't think it's very satisfying. I think it should be the first to outflank wins effectively. In this case, the fact the enemy's still alive allows me to move in and capture them alive, but as I keep saying, that's not going to matter too much. Here's an example of that enemy Overwatch I mentioned. You can see that Overwatch is now just a zone on the floor you can't move into, and the zone is really small, it's extremely generous, so you really can still advance when the enemy are on Overwatch, which I quite like, because I didn't really like the stuck behind cover Overwatch style gameplay of the previous mainline titles. Here's my Overwatch being used to fight some of those reinforcements. Here they come again. Once you've killed a few enemies, they just start respawning, running into the map, and maybe you'll get a bit of damage on the way in. There's some classic XCOM. We shot just at the ground and somehow did some damage to the enemies. The line of sight, still infamously poor. Here's another infamous thing. Sometimes cars explode and do damage, so they don't make for very good cover, but they are most of the cover on this little tiny map we're on, so we'll just have to deal with that. Another big error coming up. This time looks like it's calling out a David B, and the game is still going behind the error message. We actually took some damage back there. Oh well, seems that things are generally fine. That's another tit-for-tat flanking situation where our two guys at the top are just going to be shooting each other around the edge of a car, and I just think it's sort of lame. One of us should be dead already, basically. That's what I want to see. Luckily, the game's also very generous with healing. You can use the Gremlin heal every single turn. That used to be a limited use item in older XCOM games. Now we can just straight up do it, so we can heal a certain amount of damage constantly. Therefore, we can sit at the edge of cars getting shot constantly, and it's sort of okay. Although this mission dragged out for a long time. We've long since done the objective to extract some guy, but I can't extract my squad because we have to move past the enemy spawn point to get to the extraction point, and they're just all over us all the time, and I feel obligated to try and combat them. And when they bind us with these snakes, well, now we're very obligated because we can't extract. You do have to extract everyone to complete the mission, and if anyone dies, you just fail and have to go back to a save, so we do have to do all of this. We save ourselves here, despite an error message from being killed with our new Agent Blue Blood there. and we can also rescue Verge from this other Python. And we'll now have some breathing room because the enemies, I think, have stopped respawning. I think we just killed all of them. Not quite sure. Maybe if I waited around, they'd still start coming back again. Well, I wasn't too unhappy with this result because I thought I've captured and killed loads of enemies. And not only do the captures in theory give you intel, the kills in theory can level you up, and you can level characters up and unlock new abilities. More errors on the way out there by the looks of things. At some point I deactivated that mode, by the way, so that should stop happening. There's a look at those abilities. There are fewer abilities and they seem to matter less than in previous XCOM games. There aren't that many choices and everybody's locked into their class. So it's not so much about building a squad as it used to be. Here's something you need to do as well. You can spend your intel to put teams into the districts of the town, and that essentially provides you with your weekly income. The more teams you have, the more resources you get every Friday. So this means intel is a primary currency, because to get all of the currencies you have to spend intel on that system first. So basically, we want to grind intel as much as possible as early as possible. That's going to be the meta. You often have the choice to not take intel from early situations, such as right here. I actually did take lots of non-intel things early on because I'm stupid, but later I started just going only for intel. Now, as I start this next mission, I'm going to explain something that happened outside of the game, basically, that's going to inform my play from here on, and I think it's interesting to mention. What I decided to do is break one of the off-ED house rules. That rule is that when I play a game explicitly for the purpose of ranting about it on the internet, I'm not allowed to research anything. So that means I'm applying my own game design principle that all information to play the game has to be in the game, and there can be nothing where you're supposed to go and find it somewhere else in real life. But in this case, there were two things I really wanted to know. What's going on with the relationship between capturing enemies and intel gained? And is it worth staying on maps to fight reinforcements to get more kills and get more XP? And the reason I broke the rule there is that if we get those two things wrong, it's going to waste a lot of time. And it's good that I did check, because indeed, you A, don't really need to capture enemies to get that intel, and B, don't have to kill enemies at all. So the way it works with the intel, first off, is that you get 20 intel if you've captured 5 or more enemies. So that or more doesn't do anything. You do not need to capture more than 5 enemies during a mission. So the longer the mission is, the more likely you'll just do that by accident, and you really shouldn't be focusing on trying to capture enemies. Which I think is disappointing, because as I mentioned earlier, I quite liked the idea that you might want to go for captures as an added gameplay challenge and then get something for it. Turns out that most of the captures I got in the game didn't matter, because I usually captured a lot more than 5 due to my use of the tranquilizer rounds. And the fact I liked the idea of using the 100% chance to hit melee attacks just to do damage in general, which when it kills the enemy also captures them. So, that sucks. Now for the kills thing, basically the kills don't matter at all. It doesn't do anything. You do have a not very well communicated leveling system and an experience system, but the way it works according to some people on the internet is that you just get a small amount of experience every time you go on a mission, and that's it. There's no way to get more or less experience other than just not using characters, and I have at least one character right now who is not being used, so I guess I can just never use them because I'm not leveling them up for later. So that also sucks, of course, because now we can't try to get more XP. One aspect I like about this is that it's not based on the number of kills a specific agent has. So in old XCOM, if you wanted to level an agent up, you had to use them to get the final bit of damage on enemies. The damage before didn't really count, although they did change that up in XCOM 2, I think, so it kind of spread XP around if you contributed to killing enemies, or if you saw enemies die near you, something like that was going on. Well, having just flat XP for the mission that everybody gets is easier. It's easier to manage. However, I would also like to see that amount go up based on your mission performance. So if you do actually fight for a longer time during the mission, then you do get more experience afterwards. I can see why, though, they wouldn't go for that. What I think they've done is taken the easy way out when it comes to balancing, because both the intel thing and the XP thing could potentially have been ways for you to play the game better and be rewarded more, which would sort of put you ahead of the game's intended balancing. And they don't want to add in something that reacts to that. Neither do they want you to be ahead. They don't want the game to become easy because you worked hard earlier, which I don't think I'm really on board with as a principle, but that's a common thing. So what they've effectively done is make it so you can't really either get too far ahead or fall too far behind, which comes with the downside that there's no point to playing really well, I suppose. You might as well almost die, you might as well just sort of sprint across the map and try to leave without fighting the enemies, and you might as well just blow everybody up after you've captured a few of them because it stops mattering. And I think that is a shame. I feel like it would be better if they'd found a way to avoid that when it came to balancing, assuming it was all done for the sake of balancing, or maybe just programming simplicity if they were just making this quickly. It's sort of all just bandages on the fact that XCOM is difficult to balance, because games that rely heavily on RNG are difficult to balance, because they need to account for the fact the player can be unlucky, or indeed that they can be lucky and potentially find the game too easy as a result. So limiting rewards and limiting punishments is a way of doing that, I suppose, but I don't really like it. I mean, XCOM's traditional way to deal with the fact that RNG isn't a very useful game design feature is to just lie about the RNG. Fire Emblem is another big franchise that will do this, where it is apparently very RNG based, but it works really hard behind the scenes to delete the RNG, because I suppose they consider the RNG to be a selling point. They don't want to remove it. They presume that people like it being there in principle, but they're sort of aware that in reality it sucks, and people actually don't like RNG when presented with it straight up and raw. So as I remember, XCOM does things like it changes the enemy's probability to hit based on how well you're doing in the mission effectively. So if you have loads of health and loads of agents alive, you take more damage. If someone dies, you'll just stop taking damage, and it will just seem like that happened due to luck. And it's all hidden away in the background. It won't tell you what your real probability to hit, for example, is. The big difference is that often it's higher than it says it is. There are all kinds of bonuses and malices that aren't mentioned in the explicit list of bonuses and malices it gives you to hit chance that happen in the background. And I think Fire Emblem does this as well. They use something called double roll RNG, which is basically a less random version of RNG that looks like RNG. I'm complaining a lot about this for somebody who's actually made a tactics game that uses RNG to hit mechanics, although in my game I also made it so that a core feature of the game was removing the RNG. You would use teamwork to basically always have a 100% chance to take an action, because that is my personal preference. Well, anyway, the point of this rant was the capturing doesn't matter, the kills don't matter, the actual performance in the missions doesn't matter. It matters less than ever, because even if your characters die, they're still alive back when you get to base, only they'll have some sort of debuff, which can also be removed. So essentially, scraping through is fine, but I would have liked to see there be some way to reward the player for taking explicit actions in missions and allowing them to get ahead, and just rolling with that. Letting it be unbalanced because the player is too good, that's just fine. And if you really want to rebalance it, just go behind the scenes, tweak some numbers, and artificially make the game harder without telling the player, which is pretty much, as far as I understand it, what it does already, just in various ways. Who knows how much it does it in this game? This is from my experience modding XCOM 2 and seeing a lot of behind-the-scenes values where it's just lying to you the whole time, basically. So anyway, back to what's going on in the game. I'm failing this mission because the RNG was not good enough, I suppose. We are getting owned up. I ended up having to restart the mission because it went so poorly. And I suppose that's the ultimate solution to all balancing issues, isn't it? You have a game like XCOM where it saves every single turn, which sort of implies they're encouraging save scumming, and you can save scum your way through any RNG-based mechanics, no matter what your performance is. So there you go, that's the solution to everything. Just keep re-rolling until you hit all of your 2% chance to hit shots, and you'll win. Although I think I also made better decisions the second time around. Although, to some extent your ability to make good decisions is based on the RNG. For example, in this mission we had a much better breach and we got shot a lot less in the enemy's first turns. So I was more free to do a stupid move like that, outflanking an enemy where I'm just going to get outflanked myself, Well, that's all fine. There's some good luck as well. That Overwatch shot means I can melee that enemy to death, guaranteed, and that opens up a load more options, that sort of thing. So we win. After this we get a new agent, and one option to take was a snake, and of course I was going to go for that. However, I was very disappointed. The snake does not have any kind of snake voice. This is outrageous. I thought the sectoids probably should have different voices to the humans. The snakes definitely should have different voices to the humans. We've got an actual snake right here, sounding like Jesse Raspberry. I just think the aliens should be a bit less human. There's not very much that is alien about them. I suppose that's deliberate, that's the point. I guess it's like they were like us all along. But it's like, wow, it's kind of weird that they were like us all along, isn't it? Well, anyway, we move on to a story mission, the purple mission on the map, where we've discovered that the gang we're investigating is stealing government relief supplies and is repackaging them as their own relief supplies. And of course, the sentence for this relief supply bootlegging is execution in the street. Or in many cases, not execution, because I'm quite nice and I'm shooting them with tranquilizers. That still hurts just as much by the looks of things. Well, anyway, it might actually not be that they were redistributing the relief supplies, as we'll later discover in the vague plot surrounding this gang. Here was a nice feature as we go into one of the later breaches. Sometimes the items you're carrying will change what breaches you can do, and I happened to have bought a security keycard or something, and I can use it here to get an easier breach as we go into the final part of the mission. I liked that the utility items have a very clear use in this regard and give you a very clear advantage. Whereas in the older XCOM games, there were various utility items you could take to missions, but because you can't carry many things for some reason, it was often hard to know whether you should take them or whether they would end up being useful. In this game, it straight up tells you when you're going to need certain utility items, and you can just take them if you have them. I threw a flashbang there at a group of enemies, but there was a civilian in the middle, and I'll note that it pops up saying you're about to damage a friendly target if you do that. Well, I'm pretty sure it doesn't do any damage, so looks like somebody else messed up, but no red screen error with a named callout this time. Anyway, here's one of my favourite moves, the Berserk thing you can put onto enemies using Verge, which makes them shoot at a nearby enemy, often useful because the enemies will be outflanking each other, so you'll have high chance to hit, and Verge can take another action on the same turn he does that. So you've effectively shot someone, and here I also tried to stun an enemy legionnaire, but the stun is sort of a scam, because as you can see, while I did successfully stun them, they still took their turn anyway. The reason for that is that stun wears off at the start of turns, so if you stun an enemy for one turn, they have 0 turns where they are stunned, and those two numbers are different, so that was a bit of dissonance. I think that needs to be re-UI'd or re-described, or just make it so it does make them miss their first turn if they have 1 turn of stun. Now here's my favourite ability in the game. Once you have the snake in your crew, you can do the tongue pull thing that the enemies have used on me so many times during my XCOM career, and it's extremely powerful, and I used it basically all the time whenever I needed it. Both the tongue pull and the bind that the Vipers usually have are really powerful abilities that I suppose I'll talk about later if I find an interesting clip of me using them. Here I am going for the unlikely kill actually on that Legionnaire. Sometimes your melee attack will do 3 damage instead of 2. As we got lucky there to take that guy out without just sitting right in front of him where he would immediately shoot back. We picked up a thing, and now we have to leave, and you can see the room is full of enemies because they were just respawning. We're using here a slight exploit, I guess. I don't really know if this is an exploit, to escape more safely. While the game doesn't tell you that you can do it, if you take a turn-ending action while you're standing on a tile that has a green action also available, the turn-ending action doesn't end your turn. So in that case, we could shoot and evacuate at the same time. The game implies normally that you wouldn't be able to do that by saying this action will end your turn if you choose to shoot, but it just straight up doesn't sometimes, and this is one of those times. I feel like I learned that just by trial and error in previous XCOM games. It still applies here, the sort of thing I think it should just straight up tell you. Now you might note I shouldn't really be shooting at the enemy on the way out at all, simply because there's no point, there's no reward in killing these enemies, and it takes some time to do it. It would be faster to just leave. Well, I did it just to use the exploit, I guess, so that was something. That was fun. Well, here we are, back at it again with the side missions, because that story mission didn't really progress much. We need to spend a few more days doing other things before we get back into business. Here's an example of Verge's levitation ability. You might note that in these breach sections, some enemies are marked as aggressive. If you use Verge's levitate on them, they'll stop being aggressive, and the aggressive thing means that they will take a breach shot on you. So after you're done shooting, the enemy can shoot at you before you go to cover, and they quite often hit you if you do that. So you could try to explicitly focus down the aggressive enemies to make sure you don't get shot in that regard. And the levitate thing will both make them less aggressive, and it also removes their cover bonuses during the breach, so it's a useful thing to have on the first person in the breach, so that you can focus down such targets. And there was an example of it happening. Looks like we're back on a road. We need to extract a snake, so what will probably happen is they'll be extracted, and then we'll be stuck fighting forever trying to get ourselves extracted, because the extraction point is for some reason on the other side of this traffic jam. Even though we just infiltrated here, I suppose our car decided to go around the entire city and then park on the other side of the traffic jam, so we have to get back into it over there, and the enemy are in the way. Well, there you go. I'm always mad about everything. Even these minor gameplay causing contrivances make me think, well, probably would have been easier if it wasn't like this. And it even raises the question of why we're rescuing a data analyst from this parked truck in a traffic jam at all. Where were they trying to take them? And why is it parked in the middle of a bunch of dead cars? I don't think the van there would have been able to actually move in any direction. So what was going on? Do they just live in the van? There was nothing inside it. Do these guys just hang out on this abandoned freeway in case anyone comes to try and kill them, which in this case somebody did, as it happens? Well, I don't know what's going on in the lore of this completely contextless side mission where the lore does not matter whatsoever, but I'm still mad about it, just because that's the sort of thing I tend to think about while playing, and I think, well, it's sort of annoying. And it takes me out of the game a little bit, although I recognise that for the extreme majority of players, it would not have any effect on them whatsoever, and it would indeed be a waste of the developer's time to make this make sense. I'm just going to highlight to you that this doesn't make sense. This mission proves to be quite hard. We take this massive outflanking shot on the VIP right near the start, and then the VIP is basically shot at for the rest of the mission, and we just have to hope they don't get hit. I could actually spend one of Terminal's turns healing the VIP, but I thought they would be vulnerable to being one hit killed anyway, even at full health, so I'll just leave them to it. And by sheer luck, they don't get hit, even in the middle of the map there. There, a critical outflanking shot that could have easily killed the VIP hits Verge next to them instead, so that's something, and eventually the VIP just runs to the edge of the map and disappears. But then we have to try and get everyone else out. Verge actually died, and then I thought that what I'd have to do is pick his body up and bring it to the extraction point, because in old XCOM, if your objective is to leave the battlefield, you have to carry the unconscious squad members with you. So I essentially fought over this little tower that his body's on top of, trying to pick the body up. You're not allowed to do that, as it turns out, which is my eventual clue that we're going to have to just leave him behind and see if it game overs me. Well, it doesn't, because how the game works is when you leave the battlefield, just assumed to have automatically taken all of the unconscious enemies and allies with you, so you get all of your captives, and your half-dead squad member comes back to life back at base. So that was something. I guess it's easier than it looks, as it turns out. Now there's this purple mission here, which might make you think it's a story mission. It's a mission that kind of accelerates the story, I think. We can make the actual story mission happen sooner in the game's timeline if we do that mission now. But I felt like this is sort of a trap, really, because you want more time before the story missions because they're harder than the side missions. And doing more side missions means you're more likely to have leveled up and got better equipment and stuff. Although then again, maybe the more time that passes, the stronger the enemies get or something, so there is an advantage to just trying to get through the story missions as quick as possible to complete the game as quick as possible. Well, I did this side mission, and there was basically a thing we had to destroy, but firing at it gave me this warning that it's going to cause friendly fire damage. Again, I'm pretty sure that warning is not applicable here, because it's only if that thing explodes it would hurt a civilian nearby. But that shot I was going to take was guaranteed not to destroy the thing, so it wouldn't have exploded. Well, it turns out I got scared enough to not fire at it, so we're not going to progress the objective there. But later on, one of the enemies moved to use that thing as cover, and because they went next to the civilian moved away. Thus, they were outside of the explosive range of the thing, so I could blow up the thing and also kill that enemy. A nearby enemy also dies of poisoning. This is another advantage to having the snake on your team. They can poison an enemy during a breach, which is really useful because it has a 100% chance to do some damage immediately and then does chip damage for the rest of the fight, which in many cases will mean they only get to take their first turn, which is very useful. So anyway, we move on to the next side mission. Another little challenge. We have to save a guy at the back from an enemy even further back. But this is quite difficult because it's just so far away from where we spawned. We have to really run over there to have a chance. Well, I decided to try. I sort of ran up the middle with Godmother just taking damage. We can, in theory, save this civilian right now, because Godmother's maximum damage in the damage RNG is enough to kill a legionary. We're guaranteed to hit, so that's something. Or we could get a critical hit, which is 33% chance, and that would allow us to kill this guy. And we fail, we get no crit and the minimum damage, so the legionary will survive, although someone else dies over there, again due to poisoning, very useful. And indeed, that legionary, or legionnaire I should say, goes over and just annihilates the civilian. They got the crit. I think in my previous modding of XCOM, I made it so that outflanking shots are much more likely to crit. I think 33% is too low for a point-blank range outflank. I'd like to see it be at least 50, and realistically I just want it to be 100%, that's all I'd really want to see. Well, anyway, we go on to clear up the area. I think it's just a shame having that RNG-based damage. I know it's supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be sort of risky to do things like I did just there. I suppose it's just less fun to me for things like that to not be guaranteed to work, and I would be willing to accept that if you couldn't save scum, because you get in situations where you feel like, well, what I did was the correct move, it just didn't work for a random reason, and the game makes it very easy to just reload the save before you moved and do it again until it works. And the fact it makes it so easy kind of encourages you to go into that very suboptimal use of your own time, save scumming to advance the game. So my solution to that would just be, well, just make the best outcome always happen, and then you can do more planning around that, and if you want the game to be harder, just make it harder in a different way that's not RNG. It's your boy back at it again, hating RNG. Well, in this next encounter, we saw me use a ceasefire bomb. That's a very useful item. That means the enemy can't use their weapons again until they reload. That means they can't move and shoot in the same turn, making it very hard for them to get an outflanking shot on you. Very useful. Now in terms of the plot, well, we've shot a load of people and we haven't found out anything about who killed the mayor so far, but it's decided that maybe somebody will talk if we take out the leaders in this gang, Grey Phoenix. So basically we just need to shoot more people, perhaps some better people to shoot. For that we need to do this story mission here. We have the option to actually not do it, but because the district is at max unrest at the moment, if I don't do a mission there, the City Anarchy bar will go up and you get game overed if you get all of the Anarchy bar filled up. So this is effectively the Avatar project system from XCOM 2, repurposed. There's another thing going on in the background. You have these little buttons at the bottom, some of which can reduce unrest and therefore reduce anarchy. Well, whatever, we're going to do the story mission now. Maybe there'd be some advantage to letting the anarchy go up and doing the story mission later so that it was easier. It does say it's very difficult over there, but there's not much we can do about that, really. In this second encounter of the mission, we can vent the enemy. This is another special breach you can take if you equip some sort of infiltrator armor upgrade, which I happen to have done on 2 of my agents here. You can go in through an alternative route that's better, which is nice. I really like the way there are different breach options based on your loadouts, and it does tell you, as mentioned before the mission, what kinds of breaches you'll have, so you can just load out your characters in anticipation of these options. Here I had so many good options for who to shoot, I didn't know who to pick. For some reason, I have really high chance to shoot even people I have basically no line of sight on. I think that's because going through the vent buffs you, basically. And there's an example of what happens if you don't kill the aggressive enemies during a breach. They also shoot back at you, and we take a bit of damage to start this fight off. This is a good fight overall though, because we're on this high ground if we go through the inferior breach option. And that gives you accuracy bonuses when you shoot down at people down there, so that makes life much easier. We can also do some snake on snake action there, binding the enemy's python with my python. That's what we like to see. Try not to get the wrong idea, YouTube algorithm sama. I'm going to take down this adder here with Godmother. But the nice thing about having trank rounds is that if you kill somebody who Verge has added to their neural network, that's the purple thing, then they stay in the network. That network thing is basically Verge's accuracy goes up the more times he uses psychic abilities on enemies, and they sort of stay in his network, whatever that is supposed to be. There's the enemy doing it themselves on themselves. That's one of those cases where it's buffed that Python, but if I go and take out the guy who did the buff will be removed. However, just because of the formation here, that's going to be too difficult for me to do. But anyway, yes, leaving enemies alive is useful if you're using Verge and you spam the psychic abilities, so there is some upside to rendering enemies unconscious rather than killing them. You get bonus accuracy. Well anyway, that mission goes fine. Here's the ending of it, where I was being careful to take the enemy officer alive, because it did say, like in the dialogue, there was some explicit advantage to taking them alive. But what I can't tell is whether that's a lie or not, because after the mission, there's nothing here like on the left saying you get 100 bonus intel for taking the guy alive or something, and the post-mission cutscene is written as if you could have killed them, so I don't know, maybe there was less of a non-linear path here than I thought. Speaking of which, I thought this might be something non-linear. What's really happening here is some more background action. It's asking us to pick from two paths. What it's essentially saying is, if you do the thing in the top left, the bad thing at the bottom right won't happen, and the other way around as well. So we're just picking a bad thing to happen. I'm going to go with the let them take civilian hostages thing, because I did not want to have that armor shredding impact debuff going on. And that was because I knew I'd now just got enough resources to unlock the first armor upgrade, where the word armor itself is going to be the linchpin of this argument. I thought, I'm going to get a point of armor, so it would be disappointing if the enemy also got an anti-armor upgrade. Well, it turns out that when the game says armor, in this case it actually means health, which adds to the confusion. So you have an armor stat that none of our characters have at the moment, which reduces all damage by a certain amount, but the armor upgrade increases your health. Well, that was a bit confusing. That could have been more clearly communicated, I suppose. Getting the health is useful too. Perhaps more useful, it lets you take another item into battle after you get that armor upgrade. And unlike in old XCOM, where you get the armor upgrade and then you have to individually give it to everyone, it just presumes that everybody got the upgrade, which is a bit easier basically, although that's only because there are fewer upgrades. There's no choice to it, so it might as well just give it to everybody. Making use there of the fact that an enemy was hiding behind an explosive barrel to get some cheeky damage. Those explosive barrels are very weak, which I suppose is just done to counterbalance the fact that terrain objects are always hit 100% of the time if you fire at them. For some reason, basically, I think it would have been a bit more fun if that barrel was as hard to hit as a barrel-shaped thing in the game's logic, but it actually blew up and did some serious damage. Well, whatever, the game's just not that intense, I suppose, so there was a small explosion, but then a more powerful assault rifle burst to the chest, knocks them out, and now they've gone to sleep. How nice. Looks like another chance for some venting going into the next part of this side mission. It was a great use of Verge, first using the Battle Madness spell to make one enemy kill another, then taking advantage of the big buffs to accuracy to shoot an enemy out of cover virtually guaranteed, and down they go, so 2 enemies immediately eliminated. That's what we like to see. I am a Verge stan in this game, and the enemy are scurrying into the corner. They are afraid of us now, it seems. This was another mission where leaving proved a bit difficult, partially because I'm bothering to shoot on the way out. As mentioned, a complete waste of everybody's time, including yours, because I keep mentioning it. Well, it just feels like the right thing to do. It feels wrong to just leave without taking a 100% chance to hit shot. Well, we're lucky here to escape without taking too much damage, because we didn't have the setup to leave peacefully with the enemy's turns all being after ours. But we just relied on the fact that we're probably not going to die. We actually have quite a lot of health now after those health upgrades. It would take like 3 or 4 bursts of enemy fire to kill us if they don't crit. So it's kind of fine to just walk away getting shot all the time and turning the other cheek. Now we have another chance to do a story advancing mission that I'm going to strategically not take. I still presume that's the optimal thing to do. Here I can't quite go to the mission because it wants me to take a look at this scavenger market. You can spend intel to get stuff, another mechanic that was in old XCOM I guess, so they decided to put it here. Makes no sense whatsoever, but I guess the cops, they get their gear off the back of a truck that comes by the police station sometimes with a few shady individuals, and they pay them by giving out classified information. Well, that seems like a good idea. I don't know why XCOM can't just straight up give us this gear. There's no plot reason for the gear progression mechanic of the game to be here. Well, that's just another place where I have to suspend my disbelief and try not to be too annoying about things. Here we have, after skipping the next mission, a moment where I'd unlocked the ability to buy the upgrade for the SMG weapon. The upside to this is that you don't have to buy it for every character, same with the armor, so it's simple. However, the thing I was a little bit annoyed about is that you only get +1 damage, and I was really gunning for at least +2. And because I think there are only 2 possible upgrades, this suggests that the number progression in the game is going to be very limited. So this just feeds into the stuff I was talking about earlier, my dream of being able to do one-hit kills or do things more reliably. Probably not going to happen, even if the game doesn't just increase the enemy's health whenever you increase your damage. That's the classic XCOM move, to sort of just cancel out any upgrades you get by giving the enemy the same upgrade or the countervailing upgrade. Well, anyway, here I am breaching through the roof of a building. This was an interesting breach because everybody gets a buff on the way in, but the downside is that you can't do breach-specific things, like we can't throw a grenade down, because that's a different action to breaching, and only the second person in the breach stack can do those auxiliary actions. Something, something, something. We cleared out a room somewhere. Here was an interesting case where I captured this Praetorian and got an achievement for it. I've actually captured a Praetorian before, earlier in this video you might have noted, but that Praetorian was called Lieutenant, so it didn't count. Well, there's a really minor criticism to point out. Technically, I should have had that achievement before. So here I am buying both the assault rifle upgrade and the SMG upgrade, +1 damage for both. What a sucky upgrade, basically. I'm just sort of mad it didn't do more. We go from doing like 3 to 5 damage to 4 to 6, which is better because sometimes enemies have 4 health, so the low end of your RNG might kill them if you get the hit there. But still, I guess I just wanted it to be +2, or what I really wanted was for the damage RNG to go away, I suppose. That would have been a fine upgrade as well. Anyway, we've still got some more side missions to do before the main mission. We are suffering though, because the main mission's area was at max unrest, so as we wait for the main mission, our anarchy bar is going up. Here's an example of these special breach things you can do. We blow up this wall and then also throw a grenade in. That's the ceasefire grenade that takes out all of their weapons. Meaning this first room of the encounter will be really easy because the enemy are going to mostly be wasting their first turn trying to reload. That makes it extra safe to charge in and try to capture some enemies, which we don't necessarily need to do as mentioned. I usually get way more than the 5 you require to get the 20 intel, except in a few cases where there are so few enemies in the room that sometimes there just isn't really the opportunity to get 5 captures. There was an example of our enhanced assault rifle giving us a sterling 3 damage on that enemy. Not very good, although the fact that Verge can still shoot at enemies in cover because of his accuracy buffs is quite good. Here's an example of a shot I would not take if I was more interested in capturing enemies. At this stage, I sort of know that we don't really need to be doing this, so it's fine to not take any extra risk on to capture them alive. Just shoot them, it's easier. We are getting into this whole being the police thing. A bit later we have this mind control attempt from an enemy sectoid. Luckily they're doing it on Verge, our sectoid, and I seem to get lucky with these mind controls. Mind control is a very overpowered ability, especially when you only have 4 party members. But we were fortunate in that enemies who used it tended to use it on Verge. I think they only used it on somebody else once and it also failed. So essentially, we were fine. Here's an example of me actually doing a stupid move to get a capture. We go out of cover. We could have just moved next to that enemy and then shot them from cover. Instead, we stand out of cover. But we're fortunate in that the enemy then fires at Verge because he has this marked target debuff, making him more tempting for the enemy to shoot at, I suppose. Also, that guy was shooting from above, so that would have been a good shot to take, so maybe it wasn't such a bad decision to not shoot my outflanked party member in front of them. Well, whatever. That mission goes fine. I unlock the thing that reduces unrest, so we deal with the anarchy problem there, and I use this major crimes task force thing to get rid of some of the anarchy as well. While another horrific conversation is going on in the background, I actually totally missed that while playing, and then just noticed this in the footage, that they're doing it again. I basically am fine with this writing style, as mentioned earlier, despite not liking it, because if they hadn't written it like that, that would have been a mistake, potentially, because that would have broken the vibe they were going for. Well, I suppose what I'm saying is, I wanted a dark and gritty XCOM that dealt with the real issues of space racism. Instead, it's more wacky stuff where getting shot in the face does 3 damage, and we all have a good laugh about it afterwards. Well anyway, there's a chance here to not do a story mission, and I was very tempted by that idea, because I felt like maybe you'd have more time to prepare for the story missions. I mentioned this before, I think. But I ultimately caved and did the story mission anyway. We have a very successful breach here with tons of really easy shots to take. I wanted to say that there is a sort of fatigue that builds up, because the side missions are all also like room combat puzzles, and that's how the story missions go as well. They're too similar, maybe that's what I'm trying to say. There are like little conditions and mini games going on in the missions, like you have to kill a certain guy first or something sometimes, but they just need to be a bit more different. The story mission after this one that's coming up will be a bit more different. For this one though, we just had to clear a couple of rooms and it was, broadly speaking, pretty easy. This isn't a case where I'm going to commentate the move-by-move stuff in any of these missions, as you've probably noticed, but if you do want that, by the way, I do have a playthrough of XCOM 2 The Long War that goes into much more detail about what's going on in the missions and the tactics involved. Here's the end of this mission, where there is a consideration to make. We have to capture this guy before he leaves the map. He's just running off the map gradually. But we can just skip that puzzle, essentially, by stunning him there. Now he can't move for a turn or two, and we'll just leave him there in the middle of the room, giving us plenty of time to gradually shoot everything else to death. This is another mission, by the way, where the dialogue says, please capture this guy alive. So we do that, but I don't think there's any indication that this does anything, or I can't really tell what would have been different if we hadn't captured that guy alive. Well anyway, what we did there in the story is we cut off the weapons supply to this gang we're investigating. We still actually have no clues whatsoever and no links between them and the crime, but we've killed a lot of them, which is always nice. We do now though go into the sort of end game of this little bit of plot, because we immediately have another story mission available that we don't actually have to go on. It turns out that the alien spaceships are still around. This is one thing that surprised me a little bit. I thought in the premise of the plot, the aliens can't leave, but a lot of the old alien technology, including their spaceports and their spaceships, are just kind of around being unused. So the Grey Phoenix gang has gone to storm one of these spaceports to capture a ship, and our guys are worried they might wreak havoc or something if they were to do that. Well, we'll see, they're probably not going to a bit later. But yes, this is a case where I didn't do the story mission right away, because I could do that situation and get some free resources, and then we had the opportunity to continually delay the story mission, but I'm not going to in this case. I do, though, get this upgrade on that area of town, so that now when I do a mission there, I'll get some bonus intel, so waiting at least one extra day did pay off. Now in this story mission, we do have something we have to do that's a bit different. We have to press buttons every turn. You get one turn to prevent the UFOs from launching out of the spaceport, so this sort of means we have to do certain moves during our rounds, and we have to plan for that. So that's interesting, I think. That's the sort of thing I like to see. What I don't like to see is stuff like this here. Tried to use this subdue, which should have been guaranteed to take out that Praetorian. Instead, I think it glitched out and just sort of attacked the air, and nothing happened, and this mission, broadly speaking, wasn't going that well so far. You can see Verge actually did get mind-controlled right away. And the issue there is that this is a very powerful ability, as mentioned. It would be much less powerful for an enemy to have a thing that just killed you in one hit. Because here, not only have we lost a squad member, the enemy gain your squad member, usually in a great position. Essentially, this all goes very poorly. The fact I haven't killed that Praetorian yet also comes back to haunt me, doing some extra damage. And then we end up taking this slash on our snake. They go into bleeding out. Normally I think that would be fine, because they would just survive, you'd go through the encounter, and then that robot we've seen here and there would come in to replace them for the rest of the mission. It looks like on this story mission though, you're not even allowed to go into bleeding out mode, so we're just kicked out and game overed, and we just do it again. This time, it goes absolutely fine, so here we are encountering some more RNG shenanigans. There's a chance for things to go badly, there's a chance for things to go well, and if they go badly, well, just take the chance again and maybe they'll go well. Here I am discovering the hard way that you can't bind a faceless with the snakes, and I'm stuck standing in an awkward position. Gonna take the shot just to get started on the damage anyway. We did actually have that faceless disoriented, because if you have a slightly better breach, which I think I did, so you might kill one extra enemy or something, it makes the first round of combat easier enough that you can take more favorable actions, and that makes everything else easier. So in this example, I got a flashbang off somewhere basically, and that went fine. We barely took any damage when Verge got hit there, and they didn't get mind controlled. So just this version of the mission is going way better, mostly I think due to RNG. There was an example of the sort of thing I don't want to see. We just stuffed an assault rifle in that guy's mouth, pulled the trigger a couple of times. He's still alive. I would like it if that would have taken that enemy out. This Legionnaire now picks up a big miss on Verge. What actually might be going on is because I just failed the mission. This is the exact sort of time where XCOM will be like, oh okay, the player's doing badly, I'll just change the RNG. Because what they can't do is allow that bad situation to happen again, and it is equally likely to just happen again. So they need to make it so that once things have gone badly, once it just changes the RNG, the enemy all gets minus 20% chance to hit everything for the next attempt at the mission, but of course it doesn't tell you because it wants you to think you're lucky or good or something. Well, it's only because I've done this modding, as I mentioned, that I know the game is sort of manipulating you, and I just would like to see it either tell you, although I don't think that would be a very good idea, and preferably just get rid of the RNG altogether. That's the takeaway message, obviously, of this rant video. I'm kind of done with RNG combat mechanics, especially in XCOM, where you also have RNG damage, and things like spells going off is RNG based, and they can just change everything, such as that mind control. And it's so easy to save scum. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just essentially gambling, and I know I will win eventually, so the gamble is kind of low stakes. And the enjoyable element, the tactics, is really just working around the gambling element and occasionally being able to work with it when the chance to do something is very high, and you can say, yes, I will just do this. Here's some good luck. We're able to tongue pull that guy through a wall and take him out with a bind. That sort of thing. Like, if that hadn't happened, that guy could have just mind-controlled Verge in the next turn, and then we'd go on to lose the mission. But because it did happen, the mission's going to be pretty easy as a result. That's the kind of thing I guess I want to somehow get out of the game design. Well, we're fine now. We make it to the next room. There's another mini challenge here. The enemy are trying to get to the back to go out into a UFO. So I thought I'll run to the back of where the enemy are to be in a better position to block them from leaving. Pretty dangerous because now most of them will outflank me, of course. However, since the enemy are going to be focusing on leaving, they might not shoot at me too much. That's the theory, and here's how that works in practice. We take a nice crit there. Doesn't really matter because we just have loads of health, as mentioned, so you can safely just get crit a couple of times, sometimes even. I made a useful discovery here as well. The Paladin towards our side of the map used their shielding mind ray ability thing on the Dominator at the back. Turns out killing the guy making the shield actually also kills the guy who was shielded. I thought it would only get rid of the shield. So that was a useful discovery. I think I did use it one other time somewhere else as well. Very efficient. There was a mini-boss of sorts where at the end of this room we had to fight a sector pod. It's easier than in regular XCOM though, because they can't shoot you during their first turn. They sort of set up and show where they're going to shoot, and then you just move to the side and don't get shot. So we blast this thing down without taking any damage. Then there's another challenge in the final room. The enemy are running towards this UFO control panel to launch the UFO that we're also in with them. And this guy runs over and stands on the danger spot right away, even getting a crit against us in heavy cover. This guy's pretty lucky. This Muton seems unsure what to do and eventually teleports. If you've seen the game behind the scenes, it's basically a whole load of strangely composed .txt files that are somehow strung together to make a game render on the screen. It's a very unusual setup, which makes it quite easy to mod, which is useful. Anyway, we get lucky, I suppose, because while that guy was on the "you're going to fail the mission" spot, in the next round I was able to shoot enough and get a crit even to take him out before we failed the mission. But now other enemies will gradually take on that goal to go and launch the UFO. We though use our snake's tongue ability to pull the next guy through the wall and just bind him, so now that guy is not going to be pressing the button. We have the same problem over here as well with Godmother. What I hoped was that the guy who was bound, because he's technically alive, would just continue being the one who's going to press the button and nobody else would do it. But the mission actually passes on to that snake nearby. I used a Berserk on the Legionnaire at the back to get the snake off Godmother, thus preventing her from missing her next turn because of that bind. That's the sort of useful tactic that I like to see. It's always satisfying to do things like that. I just want it to be guaranteed, of course, that's what I keep saying. We take out that snake and then clear the map. Curiously, we actually didn't kill the Praetorian that was bound. You don't have to kill everybody to complete the mission, they just have to be incapacitated in some way. And now we learn from the enemy surrendering to us what was really going on. It turns out what they were doing wasn't very relevant to our investigation whatsoever. They were trying to steal this UFO and gather those supplies earlier so that they could just leave and not live on Earth. And as they mentioned, the entire planet is a prison to them, so going to prison is no different to their normal life. Well, it sounds like they're having a great time, not at all depressed, and, well, maybe we haven't actually achieved anything here. And it raises the question, of course, of why they're not allowed to leave, which makes me think that maybe XCOM aren't quite the good guys they think they are, because I had assumed the alien technology was just gone or something, that they were trapped here, because the aliens are effectively slave soldiers to the Elders, so they've been left behind. It would make some sense for them to go back to wherever the Elders enslaved them from in the first place, especially because we have all of their ships, apparently. Well, they're straight up not allowed to leave, and all this gang did was gather up weapons so they could forcibly hijack a ship from the government and leave, because that's all they really wanted to do. Well, we've done the right thing, everyone's dead, nobody gets to leave, the world is a prison, it's all lovely here on Earth under XCOM's glorious rule. The director of Chimera Squad eventually decides that there must have been some shadowy group helping them from behind the scenes, known as Atlas, a very cliché name I must say. Well, that's the end of that basically for now, and we go back to this decision tree where we need to decide who else might have been responsible for killing Mayor Nightingale in the beginning in the shot I accidentally cut out. Well, it's probably neither of these two groups, to be fair. Well, we can go and kill them. And this is where I effectively sort of stopped wanting to play the game, because we got to this point and I just thought, I guess I don't really want to do that again. I don't want to go through another investigation, because it didn't feel like it was going anywhere, both in terms of the plot, but perhaps more importantly in terms of the gameplay, because I now sort of know that my upgrades aren't going to do anything. We've already unlocked most of the perks in the game, these special abilities, and most of them don't do very much. Well, I just thought, I guess I've seen it now. This is going to carry on for twice as long as we've seen it already. And as you might note, this video is getting pretty long, and I'm not even really commentating on what's happening. For example, we've got this new character, Axiom, who I brought in to use instead of Verge, so Verge can finally go and heal some of the many wounds he's picked up along the way. Not that any of this matters. What I thought basically is, we'll just end this video here, because everything else I would say about XCOM Chimera Squad is probably the same as what I'd say about the first campaign section of XCOM Chimera Squad. Basically, you fight enemies in little combat puzzle rooms, and I think overall that these mechanics are good, or at least they're better than regular XCOM's more open-ended combats, where you spend time moving between the encounters. Just because I didn't enjoy moving between the encounters, basically, and just saying you suddenly are in an encounter and you just deal with it as it is, as it's presented to you, that's perfectly fine, and it's possibly more fun than going into an encounter where you've very carefully prepared for it and you've got everyone positioned as you want. And since otherwise it is effectively analogous to XCOM 2, it has all of the same stuff in it and all the same mechanics, just slightly repurposed, it's probably safe to say this is technically the best of the modern XCOM game series. It's just that it's not that much better, and, well, I'm sort of coming at this from the position of technically not even liking XCOM, because I've always played XCOM heavily modded, usually modded by me, just to make it so that I specifically would like it more. And, well, the issues that old XCOM has are still in this game because it's effectively the same game, and while I praise it for actually being better, I'd rather play all of this than all of a normal XCOM campaign. But where this game possibly falls down in comparison to old XCOM is that while old XCOM barely had a story and it was pretty bad in my opinion for the most part, this also barely has a story to an even greater extent. I don't even know what's going on slightly, and I strongly suspect that nothing is going on. So I think we've just got an excuse to have these mechanics happen. It's almost as if this game design would have been better suited to being a use of the XCOM game engine to make a different game. There's no way that would get past the producers, of course, so it has to be an XCOM branded game and it has to take place in XCOM's timeline, but those are then major weaknesses of the new game. From a gamer's perspective rather than the developer's perspective, for them, that was probably a good decision, so I don't really know what I'm saying here. Other than that, I actually thought this game was better than I'm probably presenting it as, and I probably would have played more of it if it wasn't for the fact that Total War Warhammer 3's Immortal Empires campaign has come out today, actually, at the time I'm recording this. And essentially I was just playing this game to wait for that to happen, and I don't feel like continuing to play this game. You can see a little bit of what's actually happening here. The new group we're fighting, it's basically Advent, the opposition, or some of the opposition in XCOM 2. They're still sort of going on strong, they've got religion now, they live in the sewers, they're having a great time. And, well, it gives us different enemies to fight, so it is a little bit different to the earlier part of the game, although functionally they're sort of the same in many cases. Doesn't really matter too much. So, overall, XCOM Chimera Squad, technically good. That's my review I'm going to give it. It's technically quite good. They've improved upon what XCOM 2 was, and I think they've used it quite well to make the game that the developers were probably told to make with it. But I still don't like it, and I wanted it to be written completely differently. What I actually want, to make another big final analogy, is for somebody to just straight up make Valkyria Chronicles 4, but it's XCOM, so a not anime kawaii desu version of Valkyria Chronicle 4's combat mechanics, another squad-based, sort of real-time, sort of turn-based tactics thing that I think does everything that XCOM does mechanically, but better and more sensibly and less glitchily, and is much better to portraying a larger scale conflict that XCOM was always supposed to be but just never was. Because it's a game based on a game from like the early 90s or something where they've decided to inherit all of the limitations just for nostalgia purposes. Something. Obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. But I thought this game was okay. I get the impression that people probably didn't like this game because it's a little bit different to the old XCOM. People probably would have preferred a direct sequel. Well, to me, this basically is. It continues the plot for what that's worth, and I think it continues it very poorly. And it improves on the mechanics while keeping most of them, so in that regard it is a sequel really. It's as better than XCOM 2 as XCOM 2 was better than XCOM 1. Perhaps that is true, and perhaps that makes sense. Well, let's just get out of here. An okay game.